channel. In this tutorial, I will show you how to make this easy summer top. For this tutorial, I will be using this lovely yarn by Rose Color and a 4mm hook. You can use any yarn you want, but make sure you use a hook that is larger than the recommended size because we want the stitches to be loose. Make a small swatch first to check your gauge before you begin. So here's my swatch. Do any number of odd chains. Your first row is all DCs. The second row will be DC chain 1 DC. So measure your swatch like this. So I have 12 DCs in 3 inches. So that means I have 4 DCs in 1 inch. So let's remember that. The next step is measuring yourself. Measure yourself around the widest part of your bust and now divide that by 2. That will be how wide your front and back piece will be. So my measurement was 36. So divide that by 2. I get 18. So I need each piece to measure 18 inches across. Now let's calculate the number of stitches. We've already measured the swatch. You already know how many DC you have in 1 inch. And you also know how many inches wide you want your top to be. Now we're going to multiply both of those numbers to get the total number of DCs we want in the front and the back pieces. So I had 4 DC in each inch. I had 4 DC in 1 inch. And I want my piece to measure 18 inches wide. So let's multiply that. So I get 72 DC. Now we need an odd number of DCs in each row. So I'm just going to add 1 to this to make it an odd number. So I have 73 DC. That means we're going to chain 73 plus 2. So that's the extra chain that we skip in the beginning. So I will have a total of 75 chains. I hope this was clear for you. In case it wasn't, let me explain it again. So we measured our gauge and found out how many DCs we have in each inch. And then we measured ourselves to find out how many inches wide each piece has to be. And then we multiplied those two numbers to get how many number of DCs we need. But since we need an odd number of DCs for our pattern, we add 1. And then we add 2 for the chains we'll skip in the beginning. Before we begin, you can find the written pattern on my blog for free. I've left the link in the description box. If you'd like to support me, you can buy this pattern on my Ravelry store for just $2. Let's have our checklist. Yarn, hook, yarn needle, scissors, and stitch markers. Chain the required number of chains. I'm going to need 75 chains, so I'm going to go ahead and chain and join you after that. So I have my 75 DCs right here. Now to begin the row, skip the first 3 chains and make a DC into the 4th chain from the hook and make 1 DC in each chain across. I like to work in the little bumps that are right behind the chain because it gives a very nice finish. Let me show you how it will look. it will look like this. Can you see that? So you'll have 2 loops at the end, and it gives a very good finish. So keep working this way, making 1 DC in each chain across, and I will meet you at the end of this row. So I have finished row 1. To begin row 2, chain 4 and turn. This chain 4 forms the first DC and chain 1. So we're going to skip the very first DC because this chain replaces the first DC, and we will skip the second DC, and we're going to make 1 DC into the third stitch. Now chain 1, skip the next DC and make 1 DC in the next stitch. Chain 1, skip 1, DC in the next DC. Chain 1, skip 1, DC in the next DC. Chain 1, skip 1, DC in the next DC. So keep working like this till the end of the row, and I will meet you there. Your very last DC should be on top of this chain 3 that we skipped. So I've reached the very end of my row. So your last DC should be on top of the chain 3 that we skipped in the beginning. So let's go ahead and make row 3. So chain 3 and turn. So the chain 3 replaces the first DC. So skip that stitch and make 1 DC into the next chain 1 space, 1 DC into the next DC. So work your way across, making 1 DC in each DC and each chain 1 space. And your very last DC will be on top of the chain 3 in the end of the stitch. Sorry, in the end of the row. So I've reached the end of my row. So here are my first 3 rows. And I forgot to mention earlier that my swatch has been washed and blocked. So the measurements that I took were after my swatch was blocked. So coming to talking about blocking. So at this point you need to measure your piece. See how wide it is. See if you're happy with the measurement. If you have too many stitches or too few stitches, you need to adjust your piece accordingly. So I wanted my piece to measure 18 inches. So it measures 18 inches. You also need to take into account that some yarns are more stretchier than the others. So you need to account for that too. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat the last 2 rows that we just made as long as you want the piece to be. I want my top to measure 22 inches long, but I'm going to stop when it measures 20 inches because this yarn is quite stretchy. So you need to keep that in mind when you're working the stitch. Make adjustments as required, and once you're happy with the width, repeat row 2 and row 3 as long as you want your top to be. And make sure you end on a DC chain 1 DC row and do not fasten off. I will meet you once I finish working my piece. Hello my lovelies, I'm back. So I have repeated those 2 rows 24 times, as you can see here. And it's important that you don't fasten off your yarn. Don't cut the yarn. So now next step is we're going to start shaping the neck. I want you to go ahead, take your measuring tape and measure around your head. because our neck opening needs to be wide enough to fit the head. So I've just taken my measurements and I'm gonna need 31 stitches in the opening according to my gauge as I've measured it. So what we're gonna do now is take 2 stitch markers, count our stitches and place them to mark where we want the neck to be. So here I've placed my stitch markers so that I have 31 stitches centered between the 2 stitch markers, and I have equal number of stitches on each side. So what we're going to do now is go ahead, chain 3, so chain 3 and continue working a D0, but we will work only till we reach the first marker. So make 1 DC in each DC and each chain 1 space. So I have reached my first marker. Now I'm going to cut off my yarn, fasten off, and what we're going to do is reattach the yarn where the second marker is. So as you can see, here's my second marker, so I'm going to reattach it here. And continue working till the end of the row, making 1 DC in each DC and each chain 1 space. And here's my very last DC. So I'm going to fasten off. So here we have one piece ready. So this can be either the front or the back, because the front and the back are worked exactly the same way. So here is my second piece. I've already finished working it. So both the pieces are worked exactly in the same way. And the next step is joining the 2 pieces. I want the DC row to be in the right side. So I'm going to take these 2 pieces so that the right sides are facing each other, and I'm going to put them together with stitch markers. So at the shoulder seams, and I'm also going to join them at the bottom edges. Just to hold the 2 pieces together. The next step is deciding how wide you want your armhole opening to be. So for that, you're going to have to take a measurement of your armhole, divide that by 2, and that will be the measurement you need. So I want my armhole opening to measure 14 inches. So that will be half of that is 7. So I'm going to take my measuring tape, measure 7 inches down. Remember that my yarn is very stretchy, so I'm going to stretch it out a bit so that I get the right measurements. And I'm going to place a marker over here. So I'm just going to count my chain 1 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've placed the marker on the 6th row on this side. I'm going to do the same on this side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here are my markers, and I am now ready to attach the 2 pieces. So let's do it. I'm going to attach the shoulder seams first. So attach your yarn with a single crochet into the first 2 stitches. So when you're doing this row, it is important to make sure that you're working over your tails so that you don't have to weave them in later. And make sure your hook is going through both the front and the back pieces. And make 1 single crochet in each of those stitches, holding the front and the back together. So insert it into the front piece, insert it into both loops of the back piece. Make sure your 2 tails are in place and trap them in the stitch. So I'm just going to speed things up a bit. So I've finished attaching one side of the shoulder seam. I can take off the slip marker now. Attach the other side in the exact same way. I've finished my second shoulder seam. Now it's time to do the side seams. I forgot to mention earlier, before you start this step, it is important that you check that both of your pieces have the same number of stitches, both in the shoulder seams and in the sides. So now I'm going to take my yarn So let's attach the sides. So let's sew in the sides. So I'm going to insert my hook into the place where my stitch marker is and make 2 single crochet into these chain 3 spaces. And next we have the DC rows. So insert your hook into the first piece and then into the second piece and make 2 single crochet along the sides. And then we have the chain 3 spaces. So 2 single crochet into the chain 3 space and then 2 single crochet into the side of the next row. So you will make 2 single crochet along the sides of each row. So keep working like this till the end of the row. Till you finish attaching the 2 pieces. finish both sides and I will see you later. So don't go away. After we finish attaching the sides, I will show you how to do the edging for the armhole and for the neck. I have finished attaching the two sides. So I'm going to turn it inside out now. So this is how your seam should look, the shoulder seam and your side seam. The next step is optional. I'm adding an edging along the neckline and the armhole. So insert your hook into the yarn. Attach it in one of the shoulder seams like this with a slip stitch. So attach it at the shoulder seam. With a slip stitch. Now chain 3. Make 2 single crochet into the third chain from the hook. So that will be the first chain that we made. So 1 and 2. Now slip stitch into the base of this line. There's row. Repeat what we did, so chain 3 and make 2 DC into the third chain from the hook. And slip stitch into the next DC. So chain 3, 2 DC into the third chain from the hook. Slip stitch into the next DC. So keep working like this all around. So when you reach the end of the side like this, continue the same way, make a chain 3, DC at the base of the chain 3 and slip stitch into the next DC. So that will be the same DC where the next row begins. Now chain 3, DC at the base of the chain 3 and slip stitch into the shoulder seam. So we finished one side of the edging. So continue working on the other side in the exact same way. Let's do the edging for the armhole next. Attach your yarn into one of the shoulder seams with a slip stitch. So we'll be working along the sides of the rows. So we're going to make one shell at each row. So chain 3, 1 DC into the base of the chain 3. And what we're going to do next is we are going to slip stitch into this space. Chain 3, 3 DC at the base of the chain 3 and slip stitch into the next row. Chain 3, DC into the base of the chain 3 and slip stitch into the next row. So we will make one shell along the side of each row. So here's my top. I've completed the edging for the arms and for the neck, and this is how it looks now. Thank you for watching my tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Do share your works with me on Instagram by tagging @madewithlovebydaisy. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that bell button. Like, comment, and share. Happy hooking!